you want to save money on your trading card purchases, we have a promo link over at 50cards.shop. Enter the promo code ATNIGHT to get 5% off your order. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of V to Premium Transitions, the little show where we show you how to take a V Premium deck in a clan, turn it into a premium deck with relatively few steps. I'm Atlas Novak, and today I have with me Richard from Nexus Corps. How you doing, man?
Doing good. It's the hottest weekend of the year, but I'm doing okay.
So today we're covering Gold Paladin, which is, you're the clan leader for Gold Paladin, right?
That is correct.
Yeah, it says it on the thing. What was it, like a plaque they gave you, or
it was a certificate, and then I also have the little card too.
That's right. So yeah, Gold Paladin and the Paladins in general are just expensive by themselves. But I figure the people who already have it in V Premium, there's not a lot of steps to like make it good in Premium, are there?
No, not relatively too many steps to make it that good. It's a pretty decent deck in Premium for the most part.
Well, let's get into it then. So starting with the V, want to kind of take us through it and let us know what the deal is?
Yeah, so this is, as of right now, probably the best deck in V Premium, surprisingly. The combination between Gurguit and Percival is just astoundingly good, just given that Percival gives you markers, Gurguit gives units powers based on how many markers you have, so they just kind of sync. And then Mock Slash is the kind of like the kill card too, where it just extends the number of attacks you're doing, and then everything you call is getting buffed. So this is just a very, very aggressive deck, and then you can kind of see that with the front triggers as well, just adding more power during that attack. Mm-hmm. But this is like what this is kind of like a general idea of what the deck would usually look like. For the V Gurguit deck, if people like kind of play around with the ratios, but this is pretty much what the list will look like.
Mm-hmm. So you have things like Mock Slash and Sagramore, the guy on the top left, that allows you to populate the field during the battle phase if it's called off with stuff.
Yep. Wondrozo will definitely help with that as well. So Sagramore and Wondrozo are essentially the same.
Percival is also at 1 in V, right?
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Just for V Premium, not for Premium. It's a big key thing right there.
Okay, so as always, like we do with all the other deck profiles, the deck logs will be in the description, so if you want to like take a closer look. Do we want to now see what the difference is between V and Premium?
So I'll go ahead and I'll jump right into the Premium deck. So this is what my Premium deck would essentially look like. The ratios are a little bit different, but this is essentially what adding in and taking away some cards would look like. So for the grade 3 lineup, right away, Percival is bumped up to 4 immediately. So to compensate for that, we had to bump Sagramore and Mock Slash down a little bit, just because seeing Percival is just too important for the deck, just to kind of keep up with in Premium. The grade 2 lineup is relatively similar. The only difference is that instead of Berengaria, we're adding in Providential Angel and a D-series card, which is surprising because a lot of these Premium decks don't usually run D cards that often. So we have Arthen, which is from DBT05. So that kind of helps you from getting stuff not blown up.
Arthen's the guy next to Aglovale, right?
Yep, that's the one.
But yeah, what does he do?
His first skill is if he's in the front row, all the rear guards with different names than himself can't be targeted by card effects. So if your opponent wants to do something during your turn to kind of mess around, like target specific units so you can't, swing with them, or, if they want to rest them, or something like that, they have to choose Arthen as their target.
I see.
Like, it's the only possible target. After, like, if they retire Arthen, then everything's free game because Arthen's effect isn't there anymore. But, so for example, if you have a really big column and they want to swing, or they want to denial Griffin or Skeleton Cannoneer it, the only target is Arthen. So that helps a lot.
It's like a lightning rod. So you gotta get rid of him first before you can go after the others.
Exactly. So it's a really good tech. Essentially, the fact that it's for all rear guards, so you only need him on the board by himself, and you can maybe even put him in the back row if you don't want people touching him. So
that's pretty funny.
It's really nice. Yeah. But everything else is relatively the same. The only difference is we're doing crits instead of fronts, because this is an Ultima list. So Zeroth Dragon Ultima in the bottom right corner over there. So crits for sure. No over trigger because of the choice restriction between Ultima and over triggers. But Ultima is so good that I don't think you really need to worry about overtriggers.
Yeah, once again, the top 5 grade 3 searcher comes in handy just because of how much more important heal guardians are in premium than they are in V premium, because you use your G guards. And Gold Paladin has like a pretty good stable of G guardians, right?
Oh yeah, Gold Paladin has a really good set of G guardians that feel as though, like, no matter what attack is coming, you feel confident that you'll be able to guard it, just because there is a good chance that you can just find a PG during that guard step, which can pretty much block anything for you.
Yeah, a lot of decks will run, typically if they're running draw PGs, is they'll run like 3 of them and then 1 grade 1 PG, just because occasionally there'll be a deck out there that's like, all right, no grade 0s, and that shuts off the PG. But with how Gold Paladin works, where it calls it on top of deck, usually a lot of guard restricts are like, no guarding from hand. And this is from deck, so you can get around it in that sense. What's the girl next to Wonderizzle in the top right there, the gold one?
Oh, that's Providential Angel, yeah. So that's another Ultima combo card right there. It's if you have 1 or less in hand, you can counterblast 1, it gets 10k, and then for the remainder of the turn, your opponent can only use a Sentinel once during the turn. So that just makes it even harder for your opponent to block extra attacks after they do their first PG against your Vanguard. So it's another insurance card, but it's really, really helpful.
It's really killed me 8 gajillion times when we've played at locals. Because of how Ultima being able to just search whatever the hell you want with 2 on field, 2 on top of deck, usually Providential Angel ends up being one of those, because it can just turn off your perfect guards that usually you end up saving, right? Because they're like, all right, big turn's coming, and then you just shut off like 1 to 3 extra PGs that the opponent has been saving.
Yep.
And I hate it. I also noticed that back in the, like a little bit earlier, any deck using Ultima typically would have like 1 or 2 stands so they could do crits plus stands. Why is that all gone? It's all crits now.
So the big thing, the stands, I think, work well with Ultima decks. If you're not playing Gold Paladin, you really want to get off 5 attacks. Makes sense. Not really necessary in this deck. You're going to get off minimum 5 attacks regardless. But also, instead of doing 9 attacks, if you're swinging with your rear guards first before you swing with Ultima, and your opponent gets an overtrigger during any of those swings, when they take that damage, your whole turn is shut down completely. Like, Ultima will not hit a single thing. You're going to lose your G zone. It's just not worth the risk. So I think it's better if your opponent's at 3 or more damage and you go into Ultima, it's better just to have all your units hitting for 3 damage with those 2 extra crits on them. So that even if they do get the overtrigger during those damage checks, like if your opponent's at 4 damage and they take that first damage and it's an overtrigger, they still have to take 2 more, meaning they'll still go to 6 regardless. So it's better, even if they do get the overtrigger, they still have to keep taking damage, so they'll still lose. Hopefully if they don't get another heal.
For the rest of the G Zone, you want to kind of explain their roles for any of the ones we didn't cover so far?
Yeah, I think I'll just go from left to right. I'll just skip over the G Guardians. So the first one is a new card, so actually it's a good idea we can start with that. Forgetting her exact name, I think it's like Invarious. She's 100% a finisher card, that's why you only need 1 copy. It does a similar thing to what Gurguit does, or like kind of like what Mock Slash does, where you just make a bunch of small pokes. The only reason I don't run it at more is because you don't want to do it unless you're about to finish the game and your opponent's at 5 damage, because it doesn't bring a lot of power and it requires a lot of field setup. So unlike all the other Gold Paladin cards which help you build a board, this one implies that you have the board ready to go and you're just going to swing with what you got. So not a good field builder, but it's a great finisher. So we just kind of keep it at the 1. So and it doesn't need you to flip anything, so it just counterblast 1 on attack. So it's a good 1-up. So great multi-attacking, not a lot of power going on. So if you're doing this too early and your opponent gets a damage trigger, there's not much else that's going to happen for the rest of that turn. And you're using a lot of resources to build from that, because you have to call 2 from hand when she attacks, if you want that, to finish the skill. And you want to do the extended attacks because you're going to be putting rested rearguards back to the deck. I feel like just getting the restand off really isn't worth it if you're going to lose your board afterwards, since she doesn't replenish other than from hand. So there's that. And I just feel like there's way better field building and hand building options than her. Just the one is fine. Glorious Reigning. I'm running Glorious Reigning again because the deck has a soul issue, which is really, really funny. So Glorious Reigning is one of my all-time favorite G units. It was a staple almost all of G era up to like 2018 or even 2017, because I know some people were cutting it out, but this card was just so good. It just made a board essentially for free, it felt like. What it does is when it attacks, you flip a copy of itself face up in the G zones. That's why you have the 2. Counterblasting one, you choose 2 of your rear guards, put them on the bottom of the deck, and then you look at the top 7. From among those 7, you choose equal to the number of face up in your G zone. So this is kind of like a later game card. So if you have like 5 face up in your G zone, so that's counting the G guardians that are there, you call from among those 7. So fills up your board. Then if you called at least 3, so if you call 3 or more, you can then countercharge, so replenishing the cost you paid for it, and then you soul charge, so you gain soul from that as well. And that can help you proc off the abilities of cards that you called like Din Drain. So that's also helpful for that as well. So it's just a good field building card.
Din Drain is just kind of important no matter which version of Gold Paladin you run, it seems like.
Yeah, it's a staple in both V and D. For sure. Helios is kind of like one of those placeholder cards that ends up being your flip fodder. But
yeah,
it's really good because if all you really want to do is just kind of get off more triggers and quad drive, it's there as an option. If you kind of find yourself just going like, well, I have the field, but I don't really have a good setup for, either Brampton or Various, but I just want to swing with a big number. You can just go into that if you want. But like I said, it mostly goes as flip fodder. The one matchup I feel like, or if you're playing against a matchup that uses grade 1 PGs instead of the grade 0 PGs, top of my head, the only things I can think that are like that are Luard and Beatrice. I know those are 2 decks that like to use grade 1 PGs instead of the draw trigger ones. So if you know that that's the case, you can go into Helios and use its guard restrict ability, where your opponent cannot call grade 1 or graders from hand when Helios attacks. So they can't PG. It's going to get a lot of power from the amount of rear guards you can have on the board, because it gets 5k for every rear guard you have. So that means it's going to be a little bit difficult for them to guard Helios, and because it has quad drive and you're running 8 crits, you have a lot higher chance of seeing those crits and just stacking them on Helios, and you can win that way too. So that's an option as well. The guy with the sword, Brampton Dragon. This is, I think, probably the go-to stride you're always going to do for your first stride. I like it a lot because of the way that it helps you build a hand. So what Brampton does is when it attacks, you flip anything in your G zone face up, pick 2 of your rear guards, and you put them on the bottom of your deck. You then draw 2 cards, and then you can choose to call up to 2 from your hand to rear. If you called 2, it gets a crit. So this is really good because early game you have a Vanguard with a crit, so it means your opponent has to gamble between, do I let this hit so I can take more damage for my counterblast, or do I guard this because it has a crit on it? Well, but I'm at 2 damage, so I don't want to guard too early, and not gain any damage. So there's like a little bit of a pressure there as well, but I do like the option to call up to 2, so I could choose to swing, draw 2, not call any, and then triple drive, which gives you 3 more cards. So that's a 5-card draw right there, which is nice. But you also have cards like Sagramore and Din Drain, which they activate when they're being placed by card ability or placed from hand. So you can call those types of cards with the skill of Brampton to activate them to get more effects off. So Din Drain lets you draw or countercharge. Sagramore lets you draw, then call another thing. Call out Gurguit, and that lets you proc that when placed from hand. Look at top 5, grab a grade 3, so that way during the battle phase, if you draw into it, you can call it, look for a heal trigger added to your hand. So there's a lot of options you can do with Brampton. So that's why I like it to be like kind of like my go-to first stride, because it helps you set up for the later game. Next up after that, this is like the Gold Paladin specific Sibreeze, which is nice. So there are a lot of decks in Premium where they like to do this thing where they like ride to grade 3, do their stride turn, and at the end of the turn they will ride back to a grade 2.
Mm-hmm.
And by the ruling, Babas can do it.
Yeah.
Spikes can kind of do it as well, I believe. There's a way for them to ride back to grade 2. But they do this so that they get around this specific ruling where if you haven't already been on a grade 3 at the beginning of your turn, you can't stride unless your opponent's already at grade 3 as well. So if you're on grade 2 at the beginning of your turn and your opponent's on grade 2 and you're about to ride to 3, you can't stride. But there's a way around this. So with Spear Cross, what it does is if you called at least 2 units during the turn, so meeting the condition for Unite, you can counterblast 2, discard a card from your hand, and then stride it from your G-Zone to the Vanguard circle. So you can obviously also do this if you're the player going first and you're the first one to ride to grade 3 and you have the cost, you can just stride while your opponent's at grade 2. So just being able to kind of like get ahead of your opponent in that regard. Counterblast 2 is really heavy, but we do have cards like Din Drain that help you get those counterblasts back, which is helpful. Glorious Raining helps you countercharge as well. That's nice, so that way you can at least mitigate the amount of counterblast you're using. But what's also nice is that's not the only skill of Spear Cross. It has a second skill when you've already after you stride it. You Soul Blast 1, turn anything your G-Zone face up, look at the top 5, and call 2. So that just helps you build a board for a really easy cost. Yeah. So you can obviously normal stride this too if you just want to build your board. So it's nice that Spear Cross, Spear X, whatever you want to call it, lets you either stride into it meeting a wonky Counterblast 2 condition, or you can just normal stride it, fill a board regardless. The win con of the deck, all the Xerath Dragons, so I'm assuming if this is for players that are new to Premium, all the Xerath Dragons have the same condition, which is you have to have at least 3 face up in your G-Zone. You have to discard a card with the same name as your current Vanguard, and then you may stride it. The on-place ability of the minute you place it, you counterblast 2, search your deck for 4 cards, 2 get called to rear, the other 2 are stacked on the top of your deck after you shuffle. And then for the remainder of the turn, all the triggers that you would check are applied to your whole board automatically. So it's kind of like front triggers before front triggers existed, except it's the whole field, not just the front row.
That's also why it was choice restricted from the over trigger, because people could just search it, put it on top, and hijinks ensue.
Yep, your whole board gets 100 million super, and then if you were running the trial deck one, they all get 200 million. So it was very, very abusive. Very fun at the time, but very abusive. So you'd be able to put 2 crits on the top, and that means that all your units get 20k and 3 crit. And since you have a bunch of Gold Paladin is the only Excel United Sanctuary clan, so that means it's the only United Sanctuary clan that can have multiple rear guards to kind of abuse this Ultima technique with. So if you have a bunch of Excel markers from Percival and Gurguit going back and forth, you can essentially have like a full board of 5 to 7 front row units all gaining 3 crit and 20k. So if your opponent's at 3 damage, one of those hitting is supposedly going to be the end of the game. So it's like the finisher.
Yeah, and then in all Xerath Dragon's case, if you finish your turn, it blows up your G-Zone. You better kill them, which most of the time you will.
So that's the big trade-off at the end, obviously, is that you will lose your G-Zone, so that means no G-guarding. But essentially, you want to go into it thinking this is the end of the game.
To sum up, in terms of the main deck, you're changing your fronts to crits, you're adding 3 more Percival, and then you're focusing less on Mock Slash and Sagramore in favor of Percival. And was there anything else I'm missing in terms of like broad strokes of things you're changing?
The main point I would say is Mock Slash and Sagramore were a lot more important in the V deck because Gurguit is your finisher and you're kind of abusing Gurgit's passive continuous skill, whereas in Premium you're on a G unit, which means that skill isn't going to be active for you to kind of focus with Mock Slash and Sagramore. So this is more focused on consistently building a board and getting advantage, and then meeting the condition of Ultimate Stride. So that's why we have the 4 Percival, the 4 Gurguit, so that down the line, whichever one you end up writing, you're hopefully going to see another copy to discard for the ultimate cost.
Right. As always, your top 5 grade 3 searcher is more important in G, just because of also that angle with the Heal Guardians. It feels wrong to fish a Heal Guardian out of deck, but it is a legitimate play depending on what you're going against. And so just keep that in mind as you switch from one format to the other. You also had a list up for if someone doesn't have Ultima. You want to go over that real quick?
Yeah, so I understand that Ultima is an $80 card, and on top of the fact that you're spending money on a V deck, and I understand Percivals and Gurguits, they're not cheap. So buying the V deck alone is expensive, and then I understand you don't want to throw in another 80 to 90 bucks for one card. Totally understandable. So,
feels bad. This ain't Yu-Gi-Oh!
Right. It's not as splashable because every other deck would be like, what? Ultima? Why would I want to do that? The overtrigger is way better for my deck. So it's understandable that if you want to jump in, you don't want to spend 90 bucks on a card you're going to use just for one deck. So here's list version number 2 of taking V Gurguit and kind of throwing it into premium. Everything is mostly the same. The one difference you'll notice is there's no Jeffreys, there's no Paramours, because the goal is no longer just trying to get on Gurguit. The goal is also to kind of abuse the whole V system and kind of like also just making it more consistent, since you're not planning on going to Ultima for the game. You want to have like a longer tempo deck kind of thing. Like you're just kind of following the flow of the game. So this kind of helps accommodate all that as well. Biggest change is you're going to notice that the Platinum is in there along with the Overtrigger. The idea for this deck, and it's a little funny, is that what you're trying to do is you're trying to, after you've made all those Excel markers with Percival and Gurguit, if you see the Platinum in your hand, you write it, get your extra marker, and then you, during your main phase, you don't stride, you counterblast 1. You have a bunch of grade 3s in your soul because you have skills like Agleveil and all the rewriting, putting grade 3s in your soul. You are able to then change your drive checks to be a new red tech skill, which is whenever you perform your drive check, you look at the top 2, put 1 in the trigger zone, the other goes to rear. So it's kind of like looking for your triggers. So that's for the whole turn. So that means that now you can counterblast an additional 2, discard 1, go into Spear Cross as your G unit, and you can make a little board with that too, with the Soul Blast 1, make call 2 things. So now you have triple drive with the same skill of being able to, when you drive check, you look at top 2, call 1, drive check another. The idea here is that if you get really, really, really lucky and you know the overtriggers in your deck, you have 6 opportunities to see that overtrigger from your initial triple drive. If you do, all your rear guards now get the skill of when they attack, you perform a drive check, meaning you are going to be looping that the rest of the game because you call a new unit every time you drive check. That new unit can also perform a drive check.
Oh my god.
Rinse and repeat.
That's a hell of a... like, seems like deck out feel, but who cares? They're dead.
It's mostly funny just because you're going to be able to keep making a board, and that you're going to keep seeing triggers, and then we also run front triggers, so that's another thing that you can see during the drive checks.
Right.
So it's mostly kind of like another way to do a kill turn if you're kind of in a weird spot. But obviously that's kind of like the gimmicky play. You don't have to run the Platinum Azul. The deck works fine alone. It's just kind of one of those small one-card techs where you're like, I could do this turn. Let's try it out.
So yeah, just keep that in mind as you switch from one format to the other. If you already had Gold Paladin and V, it's not super hard to change. I don't think.
No, not at all. The main difference I would think is that you might, like, I have the 1 copy of Bark Truck, which is the little grade 1 5K, and the only reason for that is we're doing the other loop. There's 2 different loops in this deck, which is really funny. So there's that with the GB8, which is kind of like a replacement for Ultima. So instead of Ultima, we're doing the GB8. So the GB8 and that grade 1, they loop with each other. So they kind of do the same thing where you just keep infinitely calling new rear guards till you deck out, essentially. There's multiple ways to do fun little loops, but if you're not doing the super aggressive Ultima way, you can do this nice little fun way too.
Right on. That's pretty much it. Clan, do you want to see us cover next on this show? Leave a like, leave a comment. Richard, where can they find you and follow you?
You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on Instagram. Follow the channel and leave a comment, and I'll see it. So that's another way that you can reach out to me as well. Leave a comment on any video, and I'll see it.
Yeah, our big daddies. yeah, tell a friend, leave a thumbs up, subscribe, Patreon stuff. All the deck logs will be in the description if you want to go take a look at them more closely. Thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you next time.